Welcome to this quick guide on how to get started with GraphQL with CluedIn. Now I'm logged into my CluedIn account. There are two key parts that you need to understand to get started with GraphQL. And the first starts with what data you have available. Now let's head over to the catalog where it shows us a full breakdown of all of the property names or column names that we have across all of the different data sources that we've plugged in. Now there are three different types of vocabularies, or three different levels. The first is a tool-specific vocabulary, and this Facebook key here is a good example of one. It's where here is the way that Facebook have decided to describe the property or column of a particular object. Now, as we all know, there are different ways to describe the same types of things. And that's why we have these different levels. So the next level would be a core vocabulary of CluedIn. And we can see a couple of those here. They're marked by the logos that come from CluedIn. Let's search for something like job title. And as we filter our vocabulary or catalog down, you can see that, well, the term job title exists across a couple of different tools. And I don't necessarily want to have to query CluedIn and include all the different filters from all the different systems to search through the job title. Now, it's also worth mentioning that we might not call it job title. We might call it a position. And in that particular case, well, we need to cater for that. Right? We don't want to have to know all of the different property names from across all the different systems to filter on our data. So more importantly, I just want to use these core CluedIn vocabularies. Now in this particular case, the value of this is that CluedIn has aggregated the property names from all the different sources, whether they're called position or job title, into a common way to describe what is essentially the same thing. The next layer of vocabularies is a company-specific vocabulary. Now these exist in between the core vocabularies and the specific vocabularies. And this is a way for your business to build up your own glossary or own business terminology to describe the different properties. Now in this particular case, you might have agreed that as a business, you call them positions instead of job titles. Now that's okay. As long as your specific company vocabulary maps into our core vocabulary, then everything will be taken care of. And so what that might look like is something like company name.user.position, and you can use those filters to be able to find the data that you're after. Now there's more details that are available around the vocabularies, such as, what's the type of data we're dealing with here? Is it used in processing or personally identifying? Is it obsolete? And so forth. But really the main key here is to be able to search through and filter the different properties that you have available from the different sources. That's where we can start to head over to our GraphQL sandbox. Now let's just describe and break down what's available within this sandbox. Now of course you can run these types of GraphQL queries from our REST API. This is just a handy sandbox that allows you to get to your data a little bit quicker and just play around with your data to figure out what's the right query that you're wanting to build to get the data that you need. So let's first head over to the documentation section and highlight that GraphQL is a self-documenting type of language. In fact, we can see all the different types of querying that I can do within CluedIn. For example, if I just wanted to get the data on a particular record, I could just use the ID of that record in CluedIn to be able to get back that record. The one I'll focus on today is the search. So how do I find data in my organization and bring back what I need? So let's head over to this main query section here, where I have a history of all the queries that I've run in the past, and I can always clean up my query as well if it's not in the right formatting. Now let's break down the different structure of the query. This is a query language that is much simpler than using something like SQL. And the reason why is because this query language doesn't include joins and it doesn't include aggregate functions like group bys. And the reason why is because the data is already joined by the time that you're ready to query it. This is done by the CluedIn processing engine. So what this allows us to do is simply specify a filter. We can, of course, page through the data. We can change the sizes of these pages. And then what I'm wanting to do is, once I've filtered my data, I want to return a list of how many records match that query. I want a link to a cursor to be able to page through the data if the number of records exceeds the number that I've set as my page size. And then I'm going to project out the individual records, and I get full control of what I actually want to project out from those results. So let's just start with something simple. Let's dissect this query. What we're saying here is I'm going to be using my vocabulary or my catalog I saw before, and I'm going to want to bring back all organizations where the core vocabulary of the company's industry is banking. And I'm wanting to just project out the name of that company. And I can run this query by just pressing play. Now I have one result here, and the name of that company is Circ. Now you might have noticed that's a very fast query. We haven't done anything about specifying where to get this data from, or what systems might have a value for the industry. I haven't done any work as well around figuring out that the industry can also be described multiple different ways. We might say it's the company category, it's the company market. And this is the key behind these core vocabularies, is that it's abstracting away all the different ways that you can describe an industry of a business into a core vocabulary. Now let's do something interesting. Let's start to look at the properties that are included in this record. Now what you might find is that as I start to type, I'm given this IntelliSense, so it really is telling me what types of things can I project out from this data. And in this case, I'm going to project out all the properties that have come from the different systems for this record. And I'm also going to want to highlight where we got this data from in the first place. So in this particular case, it's pretty simple. I have a record that has come from Salesforce, and I have some properties that are available from the Salesforce specific vocabulary. And then I have some properties that have been mapped into this main core vocabulary. Now, of course, if I was to take something like the Salesforce clean status and copy here, you could then start to say, well, let's also put in filters which are for the very specific vocabulary. We don't always have to use the core vocabularies. In fact, we can use a combination of both. So as I search, you can see that it's still bringing up that result. If I was to bring back and take off that original industry filter, you'll probably see that I have a couple of more results here. So I've also got this company called Hedgehog, and maybe I'm just interested in the name of that company, or maybe I'm interested in something very specific. So I might just want to list the clean status, and I can do that by using the property name filter on the properties output. And what that will do is run that query, and I'm only interested in pulling out the name of the company, the Salesforce account clean status, and of course the places where we have data on that particular company. So this gives you a high-level introduction into the CluedIn GraphQL endpoint. It is a lot more sophisticated. So for example, the language that we use in this part of the query, there's a lot of exploration that we can do on that. So for example, we might want to say that that I want all organizations where they should have a clean status of pending. And as soon as I add that plus, it's kind of telling the solution, well, it has to have a clean status of pending. And I can also use this negative sign to say, please give me organizations where they don't have a pending status. And so that will basically bring back all the companies that don't have a value for that particular key. And you can see that we have a lot more results coming back now for that particular query. Now, of course, we also support range queries. We support fuzzy text querying. We support proximity queries. And this is really a powerful language that we can use to get the data out that we need. Now, as I explore some of the more properties that are available to me, of course, I have things like authors, I have things like aliases, and what's more important is I have things like edges. And this allows me to write some really complex queries in a traditional form in a very simple way. I might be interested in getting the people that are connected to the organizations that have come back in that original filter. So this allows me to filter down and find connected data to what I'm really wanting to find. So hopefully that gives you a high-level introduction to how you can use the GraphQL sandbox in combination with your catalog to be able to find the properties that you can actually search and filter on. We found that we can actually write queries using our core vocabulary, or we can use our specific provider-based vocabularies as well. We saw that we can use those little plus and minus types of filters to be able to force either a value for a filter or force that a value doesn't exist. And then finally, if we didn't add the type of filter, that we would really telling the system that we're wanting organizations, they should have a clean status of pending, but if they don't, still bring those results back, but at a lower order or relevance. So thank you for joining me on this quick introduction to GraphQL.